Hi, my name is Vikash, and I'll be taking a chapter from IMS today, which is Information Revolution. Before I go ahead with the presentation, I'll tell you how I'm going to go about this. First, I'll give you the information that Sir has provided, and I'll give you my opinion regarding that, a little anecdote or an example to substitute it, or to even negate it. So why I'm saying this is because subjects like IMS and CCC, they're very contextual and subjective based, and it's better to provide certain examples or anecdotes to corroborate your hypothesis regarding that answer. So let's start with the presentation. And I guess that's why there's not a lot of worded presentations here. So that wouldn't make a lot of sense. Yeah, awesome. So the information revolution is divided into 6 stages of revolution. And it starts off with the written revolution, but let's see what information really means. So when you're talking to someone and then you just say a random sentence. So if I'm saying to my friend, hey, the train is leaving. Oh, that's my dog. So, hey, the train is leaving. And it makes no sense if I don't have any context towards it. So let me give a certain context to it. If I tell the sentence, the train is leaving, to my friend, and he has to catch the train to go somewhere, that makes sense. Without it, that information, that sentence is raw data. It makes no sense. It's not information yet. So any collection of raw data which in context provides meaning to the receiver, so it has to have a certain context and a meaning to the receiver, then it becomes information. It's processed raw data. And these two examples, these two definitions are of my own. So you can write it however way you want. And coming to revolution and what revolution really means is, in the material, it's given as a profound change in society, a dramatic change in society, whatever it is a better adjective that you can give to it. But a revolution always has a shared sense of value. Even if you take the independence movement in India, there was a shared sense of the need to be freed from the British. I guess that would be the shared value, and the common goal would be to be independent from the British. So when I say a common goal, the goal is common, to be independent, but to drive that to that common goal will be different. So certain sects of society wanted to be independent because they could continue their own old feudal system, or others wanted to create a new India, and there were a lot of other factors that came into it, but all of them wanted to be independent from the British. So this is a common goal that certain revolutions have. And why I say this is because, yes, it does bring a society together, and the drive is a very important factor over here, because revolutions are always in they're stuck to a certain period of time. They don't go longer, or they don't last longer as uh, let's say, as long as social revolution. There are two types of revolutions. One might be political and the other might be social revolutions are not defined by dates. You can't say, okay, this is when it started, this is when it ended. They're always overlapping because it's not clearly pinned down. You can pin it down with a certain invention or a certain technological change that usually brings about a social revolution. But usually political revolutions is where you can pin down the date. Yeah. Let's go to the next. Yeah. So the first revolution of information would be writing. Here I had a little debate with Sir, but I'll come to that later. So in the material given, it says that in Western history, the first revolution of information would be writing, which was provided by the Phoenicians. Phoenicia was a certain a kingdom, let's say, in the Middle East, which was right next to Greece, and they created the alpha, beta, gamma. So if people can put it together, alpha, beta is what the alphabet is. So they literally created the alphabet, the English alphabet that we have derived to today, and that is where the first information revolution started. Why did it start? Because there was a need to pen down thoughts, so that they could have more time or more energy to think about more thoughts. So your brain is basically like a hard drive. Yeah. So you're exporting a little information to another external hard drive so that you can start thinking about more. So this was a huge revolution. This was an invention. The alphabet was an invention, and they were able to think about more stuff than just remembering and then just orally giving it to the others. And I say orally over here, and this is the certain debate that I had with sir in class, that I wanted to say, why wasn't oral propagation of information a revolution on its own? Because you're inventing a language right then and there. You don't have to write it. Even today, certain languages have borrowed scripts from other languages so that they can go ahead. Like for example, Assamese, and they have, it is a Bengali script. Telugu and Kannada, they're very similar together. So they did certain languages do borrow from each other because they might not have a certain script, and that is where my debate started. Where why wasn't oral propagation of information a revolution on its own? And also another question I had was, the Phoenicians did not invent writing. That I'm very, very sure. So the first ever written language was the cuneiform, and the cuneiform script was in Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is modern day Iraq and Iran, and it was between two different rivers, Tigris and the Euphrates. It was a wonderful civilization, and the Sumerians from Mesopotamia are the ones who created who invented the written word. But this is also interesting over here. Why? Because they wanted to note down transactions. They wanted to note down business transactions between other parties and contracts. The first ever need to create a language or to create a written word was because of business. And this is interesting right here. So yes, the written word did bring about a huge revolution in information propagation, because you were able to propagate even more information. Let's say I'm taking the Vedas as an example because it is a popular example of oral transformation of oral transfer of information, and it did propagate until a time they started writing it down. And there was only a certain set of information that was propagated, and it was again repeated over in time so that people don't forget. And now, once you start writing it down, you're able to think about more. So this is where the written word helps. And much farther along, coming from BCE to the 15th century AD or 15th century CE, is Johannes Gutenberg bringing about the printing press. So the Gutenberg Bible is a very, very important artifact in information revolution, because the printing press did start propagating. They were able to print more books. They were able to share more information, because before that you had to write it down. Again, over here, this is in the Western history. People had to write it down. People had to take. There was a lot of people employed in creating books, and it took a lot of time. But once the printing press was invented, again, this was relatively shorter in period in time, because again you had to put in each letter for each page, and then you had to how do you say it? You had to make a certain letter. If it was an image, you have to make the image in metal and then in reverse, and then put it in the printing press, and then make the ink, and then put it on paper. It was a huge task according to today, but then before, it was much, much faster than writing it down and then creating a book. So the printing press became a huge revolution. But regarding print, you can go back to China and India. Both of us were so advanced in woodblock printing, which is a huge, huge important part in book production. The Chinese were able to create books with woodblock printing, and they actually used to have study material for civil service exams back then, like in BCE. So that's quite interesting right over there. So you don't know where print started. This is what I mentioned about social revolutions. You don't know when it starts, you don't know when it ends. So you can go back to China as China's woodblock printing as the first invention of print, or you can say that the first mechanical print invented by Gutenberg with the Gutenberg Bible was the first printing press. So it goes from BCE to 15th century CE. So that's interesting right there. And the third revolution was mass media. Now, coming from 15th century to the 19th century, so that's around like what, only 4 centuries in difference in comparison to let's say BCE to AD, BCE to CE. And over here, so you can see that inventions are bringing about a more change, and this is where the Renaissance started happening. And there was a quote in the material given saying that during the Borgia period in Italy, uh, they created Leonardo da Vinci and the Renaissance period, but they had such a turmoil in their governance. But Switzerland had like around 500, 600 years of democracy, and they invented the cuckoo clock. So it is a fascinating quote because you tend to think about how you're in such a stressful situation, and even you can take Micah as an example on its own. You're like you're always put on spot. You're always in stressful situations, and you yet at the end you see a result. And I'm like, hey, not bad. We actually came up with something good. But again, the best result usually comes out during a stressful situation. I'm digressing over here. So, but then let's come back. So the third revolution was mass media. There were a lot of inventions coming in the Renaissance period and the Industrial Revolution. The telephone was invented, the telegraph was invented. So, but then these weren't for personal use. I'm putting telephone, telegraph here. These are not for personal use. These were in public spaces, and this was only for the transfer of information from one place to the other. Yeah. So you can transfer information from Chennai to Bangalore so easily, from Bangalore to Delhi, Delhi to New York, and it was much better than 15th century. You have to go by horse and then come back and deliver or whatever. And then you started having the steam engine coming in. The Industrial Revolution helped a lot. So now information started reaching people faster. So the newspaper was invented. There was a lot of hullabaloo regarding that, because that was when back in the early 20th century and late 19th century. There was this person called William Hearst, and he came up with the first ever newspaper to have scandalized news, who started sensationalizing news. And that became an industry in and of its own, because people wanted to know more, people wanted more gossip, and then people started consuming this more and more. So this started becoming a business. This is where you see information becoming a business on its own. So this is the third revolution. First was the written word. Technically the first was the written word. Then around, let's say, 600, 800,000 or 1500 years later came not 1500, even more than that, came later the printing press. Then after the printing press, just 400 years later, you have technology coming in and bringing in mass media. And now you have the fourth revolution, which is a very important revolution. Until now, information was just factually based. You buy a book, you want to know what is written over there. And then again, there were stories and all novels that were coming in before. I'm not going to get into that. But then usually consumption of information only meant, or largely meant, for factually based consumption. You wanted to know the news, you wanted to know what's happening in your government, you wanted to know what's happening in business. But now came a certain sense of consumption after the third revolution, that people wanted to enjoy certain information. And this came with the advent of the radio and Nickelodeon. This is not the TV, so I put Nickelodeon over here because a Nickelodeon is usually a tent space where they start screening movies that for a nickel in the US. So that usually is called a Nickelodeon. In India, there were a lot of tent theaters, and that gave rise to the first ever Indian movie that was produced, which was Harishchandra in 1913. But coming back to this, so the fourth revolution was and solely for entertainment. People started consuming music, and this also was another form of information. It was not just the news, it was not just speeches and not just random facts, but people started enjoying this information and wanted to make it to be a part of their life, or part of the daily life. And now comes the fifth revolution. So usually when I said when I spoke about the Nickelodeon, that was an important part, because usually when you wanted to consume movies, or even the radio, say you usually had one radio in the village, or a few radio stations in the city, and then you had one Nickelodeon or a few tent theaters, where everybody had to come and watch a certain movie or hear a certain information together as a community. But now this information started coming to your home. So this was when I think this was first time when King George V started giving his Christmas speech through the radio, and people were like, whoa, that's amazing! Like he's talking to me at home, like I can listen to my king at home. I don't have to go to the Buckingham Palace to see him give the speech. So this is an amazing invention that people started to consume information within the comfort of their own home. So the revolution here is not the means of revolution, is the way they consumed it. The most important word over here is the communication toolshed, where again it is your home. You don't have to move anywhere, because people, and then people started spending more time on their job. People were starting to gain more disposable income and buy more products, not just the radio, but then the TV came into being. They had their own telephone, and so on and so forth. So this is a major revolution in the early to mid 20th century, and this revolution started coming to India quite later on. So I think that would be around the 80s, after people started realizing that a market is a good thing. Yeah, and the fifth revolution is right, the again the computer digital age. It's started democratizing information, let's say, because today you have way too much information. Even now you're able, even if you're not able to understand a certain subject, people are able to share information on their thoughts on their own, and then share it with others as well through through digital mediums, like right now, for example. So this is a huge change in democratizing media, in democratizing information. And I'll bring you an anecdote over here. So what happens when you democratize information? In around 19, let's say the early 20th century, uh, USSR was a major power in the world. And about 60 to 70 years down the line, in 1989, in 19 okay, even before 1989, in 1987 to 1986, there was this a guy called Mikhail Gorbachev. He created this plan called Glasnost and Perestroika. What this meant is, usually the state of USSR controls information, whatever information goes to its people. And now he said, you know what, I'm going to be a little more open with my information. If you want anything, you ask and I'll give it to you. Don't worry. So this was the concept of glasnost and perestroika. And when this happened, when he started to democratize information, it went, it was haywire. It was absolutely nuts. People didn't start consuming information, what information was there then and there. People started going back, all the way back to Lenin and Stalin, and started thinking about what happened then, what was the revolution about, what were people doing at the entire time. And this immediately, in 2 years down the line, 1989, the wall was broken down. USSR was totally ridden off, and the country of Russia started coming in. Boris Yeltsin became the president, and there were two Russias at the same time, one USSR, one Russia. It was crazy. And all of this happened was because of democratization of information. And that is what is happening today, right now. And even, let's say, if I bring digital freedom in USSR, is a very interesting example how Star Wars liberated Czechoslovakia. So there was this little documentary that I saw where a lot of people were thanking Star Wars, because there's this one person who would smuggle CDs back into certain Warsaw Pact countries and the USSR, not the USSR, but a lot of Warsaw Pact countries, and Czechoslovakia was one. And they started consuming the dubbed version of Star Wars, and they started to see that the Western world is not as bad as their government was talking about. And they started to visualize something that was much beyond their comprehension. And this freedom of consumption of information liberated an entire country. And this is what is happening today, because the amount of information that you're taking in, the amount of information that you're consuming, is liberating, is creating a sense of liberation all over the world. You're seeing this, a lot of groups are coming up, and then they're fighting for their rights. A lot of groups are, they're fighting or whatever. That's because there is an abundant amount of information. here is where you need to realize which information you need to consume. Some might be false, some might be altered. You have no idea. This is becoming a problem now. So with every revolution, there is a problem. Mistake. So this is what I was talking about in the previous slide, where when people are able to access information, it creates a huge social unrest, or let's say a huge social gathering as well, because there are revolutions that are based on information. For example, even the French Revolution, they started knowing that the nobles are not giving back to the society as much as they need to, so they started fighting against their monarchy. And again, USSR is a huge example, and a very crucial example. Another one is Rwanda, if I can talk about it, because power here, I'll be talking about positive power, and here there is another sense of power that came into Rwanda with the advent of radio. And what happened was, in 1994, there were 100 days where there was a huge civil war that happened because there was continuous consumption of information that was propagated from the government to a certain set of people in Rwanda, and they started going on a. It was literally like the movie. Oh my god, I completely forgot. There's this movie where, one day you're able to, you can kill anybody, you can do whatever you want, you can go burglarize some place, and you're scot free, you don't have to do anything about it. So that literally was the case for 100 days in 1994 in Rwanda. And that is because they were able to access a one way kind of, or a unidirectional kind of information that was provided by a certain government or a certain person to the people, or to a certain sect of people. And that consumption led to a very disastrous change in the country's history, and even today they're still reaping from it. And it's a wonderful documentary if anybody wants to watch it. It's Rwandan genocide. It was between the Hutus and the Tutsis, if anybody wants to go ahead with it again. And that again was because of technological invention. They did not have the radio before that. Once they did have radio, that's it. Everybody had information. Everybody had this one information to go do whatever they were told to do. It was crazy. So I guess that's it. Thank you, and I hope this was not as boring as people usually find history a bit too boring. But then, yeah, stories do shape our entire culture, and stories do shape our world. And this is how I believe Sir wants to present our answers, is because you have a certain opinion about an information, or you have a certain opinion about a topic. You can go ahead with it as well and give as much as you want. I hope this was helpful. Thank you.